Hey everyone, Pugs here, and welcome to my review of Season 3 of SpongeBob SquarePants. I've talked about the episodes, so now it's time to discuss the season as a whole. Just like the last two times I did this, I'll be ranking every episode of this season, and then I'll be talking about my feelings on the season in general. Very exciting stuff. And y'all know how I am, I can never do a single introduction without quickly saying thank you to everyone who's been watching the channel. To those of y'all who've been here for months, weeks, days, whatever, y'all are all great, and I'm loving the interaction I've been getting. As of writing this script, I just reached 150 subscribers, which is awesome! I'm glad to see that people are still enjoying the channel even after I had to go on hiatus for some months. And before I get started, for those of y'all who are new here and may be unfamiliar with my rating system, first off, welcome to the channel, and second off, I highly suggest that you watch either my first review or my review of Season 1. In both of those videos, I explain the tiers in some detail, especially the review for Season 1, so I'll link both of those videos in the description. And I've got the image up of my tiers right here, but obviously this image doesn't really explain anything, so I really do suggest watching at least one of those videos. Okay. With all that out of the way, since this video is going to be a long one, let's just get right into it. Alrighty, so as y'all should be seeing now, I'm here on tiermaker.com as per usual with a SpongeBob Season 3 tier list maker all set up and ready to go, pre-made with my personal tiers. And y'all know the drill by now, I'll be filling this tier list up in descending order, meaning that I'll begin with my top 5 episodes of Season 3 and go down through my bottom 5. Now, let's just get started. So, what's neat about Season 3 is that it actually has my top 3 favorite episodes in the entire show, so the first 3 of this top 5 list are going to be those episodes. And obviously starting us off is going to be Krusty Krab Training Video, which is the one and only episode with a score of 10 out of 10. This is my favorite episode in the show, and it always has been. Its episode structure is unique, making it an immediate standout, and the training video aspect also makes these 11 minutes intensely relatable now that I'm older and have had multiple service jobs. The humor in this episode is top-notch, exactly the kind of wordy and witty humor that I love, which is why I consider this episode to be one of the funniest in the show. Krusty Krab Training Video also juggles having a lot of characters quite well, because when you think about it, we've got quite a few characters in this episode. And lastly, the cliffhanger at the end of the episode is simply legendary, nothing short of iconic, but for me it's simply the cherry on top to this perfect episode. And moving on, right behind my favorite episode is my second favorite episode, Can You Spare a Dime?, which came in with a 9.9 out of 10. One thing you're going to notice pretty quickly during my short blurbs about these episodes is that I love Season 3 SpongeBob as in the character, and Can You Spare a Dime is perhaps the best, or his best showing ever. This episode is absolutely hilarious, and it's an example of an episode with a more complex plot. SpongeBob here is the standout, being his amazingly kind self, but also not hesitating to put his foot down at the end of the episode, leaving for the hilarious and cathartic scene of him screaming at Squidward about getting a job, and of course him choking out Mr. Krabs. This episode probably has some of my favorite performances from Tom Kenny thus far, he's really just that good. And I love how it flips around SpongeBob and Squidward's dynamic. God, there's so much more I could say, but that's what the episode review is for. And then to round out my top 3 favorite episodes of this show is my third favorite, Chocolate with Nuts. There we go. Which had a score of 9.8 out of 10. This is an essential episode for anyone who wants to watch the show because it's easily one of the best when it comes to an episode with a simple plot structure with lots of gags. I mean, this episode is literally just gags and running jokes, and it works so perfectly. An interesting thing about this episode is just how much the side characters shine and really elevate the humor. Just goes to show that there's opportunities for comedy everywhere. And in fourth place for Season 3 is Nasty Patty. Where is it? Okay, there it is. Oh my god. And this came in with a score of 9.5 out of 10. And this episode came pretty early on in Season 3, and it was excellent. An episode full of vibes and morbid humor, this episode shows a really fun dynamic between SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs as they believe they've killed the health inspector. And the episode makes use of its relatively small cast perfectly, in my opinion. Because of its macabre vibes, this episode stands out from other ones, and its humor has aged like fine wine as I've gotten older. And finishing off the top 5 of Season 3 is SpongeBob Meets the Strangler, which had a score of 9.4 out of 10. This episode should be fresh on y'all's minds since it was one of the last episodes of Season 3, but let me refresh your memories. I love this episode because of its brilliant writing and handling of SpongeBob's character. It's a multi-layered episode that can be interpreted in many different ways, which is unusual for a SpongeBob SquarePants episode. And also it's just damn funny. Alright. With the top 5 out of the way, there's still a lot more episodes that are in my amazing tier, so let's rank these as well. So 4 episodes came in with a score of 9.3 out of 10, which obviously means that I like these episodes generally about the same, but after some deliberation, I did manage to rank them. So first up, I guess we can call this my 6th favorite of the season, but don't worry, I won't be enumerating like that every time, is Clams, which obviously came in with a 9.3 out of 10. I really love this episode. I love all the interactions between SpongeBob, Squidward, and Mr. Krabs, and I like how SpongeBob and Squidward end up kinda teaming up, or at least agreeing that Mr. Krabs has gone off the deep end, and Mr. Krabs is absolutely hilarious like this. I think in general, this is a pretty underrated episode, which is a shame. So many good jokes and character moments in this one. Coming up next will be Club SpongeBob, also with a 9.3 out of 10. This episode has got some pretty good vibes where Kelp Forest is involved, and this classic episode has all sorts of great jokes as well. I also really just like the balance between child and adult in this episode, between the childish behavior of SpongeBob and Patrick and the very serious situation the 3 neighbors are stuck in. It's just good vibes all around, and there's delicious comeuppance for Squidward during this episode, and the ending is just amazing. And right on the tail of Club SpongeBob is Idiot Box, which obviously also had a 9.3 out of 10. I really love what this episode is about, like what its message is trying to convey. This episode is all about embracing childish joy and imagination, and I love that a lot. I think it's kind of what this show is about, to be honest, but just because this episode is all full of messages doesn't mean it ain't funny, because it's that too. It's also visually impressive, not because of any stunning scenes, but because we're able to look at just a box for a lot of this episode and still be entertained. It's like we're being challenged to use our own imaginations. Pretty neat. I also wanted to take a moment to talk about ranking Club SpongeBob and Idiot Box. So I struggled big time to decide which one of these I'd rank higher, because honestly, I see these episodes as just about completely equal. It really just depends on the day. The reason why I gave Club SpongeBob the leg up is because I think it's just a tiny, tiny bit funnier than Idiot Box. Idiot Box is more about the positive vibes, while Club SpongeBob is more about comedy. I see value in both things, but today comedy wins over positivity. But just know that I see these 2 episodes as basically exactly the same in how much I like them. I mean, all these episodes are roughly the same given they all have a 9.3 out of 10, but y'all know what I mean. And then the last episode to come in with a score of 9.3 out of 10 is No Weenies Allowed. This episode is one of those ones that's just full of gags. It's really fun watching SpongeBob try to get into the salty spittoon and the side characters in this episode are really great. The ending of this episode is also some excellent tonal whiplash, from the wholesomeness of SpongeBob finally getting in the salty spittoon, to the abrupt cut to him in the ambulance, to the hilarity of the ending stinger of Weenie Hut General. The only episode to be given a score of 9.2 out of 10 was Crabborg. This episode is just freaking funny. Again, I get that kind of interaction between SpongeBob and Squidward where they're working together, and I really like that. SpongeBob's paranoia is simply hilarious, and it's fun to see Squidward eventually get convinced as well. Something that stuck out to me about this episode is the way it delivered jokes. I think this episode particularly does a great job at rooting jokes in the character traits of the characters. It helps everything stay in character and cohesive. Quite a few episodes had a score of 9 out of 10, which at this point I feel was just me being lazy. Seriously, y'all will see how my scores inflate once I get to later seasons. But anyway, so 6 episodes had this score, and obviously I'll be explaining my ranking as I go through. So starting off this major block is I Had an Accident. Up there. This episode, I honestly probably should have scored higher, but y'all know I don't like changing scores unless I really feel compelled to. But this episode is just beautifully bizarre, and it also has a great dynamic between SpongeBob, Sandy, and Patrick. But back to the bizarre thing, the last few minutes of this episode are just comedy gold, and really elevate this episode that would have otherwise been in my great tier. Up next, surprisingly to me, is Merman Man and Barnacle Boy 5. I say I'm surprised because I've said before that these aren't typically my favorite episodes in the show. I mean, obviously this episode is no different, having a score of 9 out of 10, but I'm surprised I like it more than other episodes with this score. But anyway, I like this episode because of the inclusion of characters beyond SpongeBob and Patrick. I also think that some of the jokes, not all of them, but many, in this episode are really good. Even if I'm shocked they got through the censors. Everything about the chief, I'm looking at you. And there is some wholesomeness in this episode as well, with the relationship between Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. And lastly, this episode ends on two tropes I love. Everybody laughs, and where are they now? So what more can I ask for? And following that episode closely is Doing Time, which also, of course, had a 9 out of 10. What I like about this episode is the focus on Mrs. Puff and how she deals with SpongeBob as she's trying to enjoy her life in jail. I also really like the trippy ending of the episode. There's a few really good jokes scattered throughout this episode as well, including my favorite one about life in the outside world, but overall this episode is more enjoyable because of its character dynamics, since I wouldn't say its humor is top-notch, hence this episode having a relatively low score, but still quite high overall for an amazing tier episode. Up next is The Algae's Always Greener. I really liked how this episode had Plankton and Mr. Krabs switch roles, even if the focus was, of course, mostly on Plankton. The way he interacted with familiar characters was interesting to watch, and I like that Pearl was in this episode since she tends to be excluded. This episode had a really slow, easygoing feel to it, especially at the beginning, which I find interesting during rewatches. Overall, the episode isn't super special for me, but I didn't have any problems with it either, and it had that wow factor it needed to be amazing tier. After that is gonna be Snowball Effect. I consider this episode and The Algae's Always Greener to be very similar in quality, just like I said for Idiot Box and Club SpongeBob. This episode is full of fun and cozy winter vibes, and it's a great showing for the classic Conch Street trio. A couple of slow moments are what bring this episode down to the low end of the amazing tier, but obviously I still really like it. And for the second to last episode of the amazing tier, it's going to be Just One Bite. This is an episode that's definitely on the cusp of the great tier, more than every other episode of a score of 9 out of 10, save the last one. This episode is good and classic, a good episode for seeing SpongeBob and Squidward interact, especially for that brief appearance of Troll Bob that has been memed to hell and back. There is one moment in the episode that specifically sticks out to me as a low point, and that's what brings this episode down to this level. The rest of the episode, while good, is not anything super special, but still I clearly like watching Squidward's desperation not to out himself as a Krabby Patty lover. And for the last episode of the amazing tier, this is going to be Squilliam Returns. This is a very solid episode. It's got some good jokes, but not a ton. Squilliam as a character is enjoyable to me, but his mileage varies, and I don't think he was used to his fullest potential in this episode. Speaking of characters, though, SpongeBob acted as an excellent supporting member of the cast in this one, as did Patrick and Mr. Krabs. Squidward himself carries the episode well enough, but I think it could have been better. Overall, though, I still really like this one, which is why it just barely makes it over the hump to be in my amazing tier. After the amazing tier, of course, comes the great tier. This tier had 10 episodes in it, and I didn't mention this before, but the amazing tier had 17 episodes in it. I mean, you can count, I guess, if you want. But anyway, beginning our foray into the great tier is the only episode I gave an 8.9 out of 10 this season, Wet Painters. The sister episode to my favorite ever episode, obviously, this episode is overlooked. And I try not to do that because clearly this episode has quite a bit to offer. This is one of those episodes where gags make up the majority of these 11 minutes, and for me these gags are hit or miss. Mostly hits though. There's one scene in this one with Patrick and the dollar that frustrates me quite a bit, which is why this episode is not an amazing. Other than that though, great stuff here. Following Wet Painters is another episode with a unique score, Rockabye Bivalve, which received the only 8.8 out of 10 this season. This is a fun episode that plays around with SpongeBob and Patrick's character interactions as they take on the role of parents. I love how much of this episode is just a parody of sitcoms. I think it works so well here. And I also think this is another one of those episodes that just works better once you're older than the 7-year-old audience this show is geared towards. Not that this episode is particularly adult, other than a couple jokes, but it speaks to certain experiences that you may not recognize at that age. Up next is gonna be Krabbyland. Another uniquely scored episode that came in with an 8.7 out of 10. I'm aware that this is a pretty unpopular opinion, liking this episode, or at least liking it so strongly, but I hope that maybe I can turn some of that around because this is a really good episode. It's hilarious and still quite relevant today, considering it's very clearly a commentary on greed, especially of the corporate kind, even if Mr. Krabs does not run a corporation. And you have to consider the both irony and poignancy of an episode about the exploitation of children being aired on a children's network, especially Nickelodeon. But even outside of all that context, I just like this episode a lot, and I really like SpongeBob here too. And coming up next are all the episodes that got a score of 8.5 out of 10, which is going to be 4 different episodes. And the first of these, and my placing it here will hopefully save at least some of the pitchforks heading my way, is the camping episode. I know that a lot of people were shocked when I put this episode in my great tier and below its sister episode, Krabbyland, but I'm gonna need y'all to listen to me. That episode is far wittier than this one is, but this one is still great. It's a classic showing of the Conch Street Trio, and it's funny. The slapstick is especially good in this one. The reason it's in this tier, though, is because there are a couple of slow moments here and there, and it just fits the great tier vibe. Maybe it's because I don't think about this episode very much, I don't know. Right behind the camping episode is probably going to be another unpopular opinion with Ugh. I really liked the concept of this episode, being a special entirely set in prehistoric times. The vibes are immaculate, and I really loved the patchy segments of this one too. The animated portion is great as well, although the last few minutes of it are kind of slow and a little less enjoyable, so that's why this episode doesn't have that wow factor. Following Ugh, also with an 8.5 out of 10, is Born Again Krabs. Another episode I quite enjoy. I just simply think this episode is funny. It's also fun to watch Mr. Krabs make such a grand change in his behavior, even if it's very much temporary. And of course, this episode includes the iconic 62-cent scene, but I also think that SpongeBob in this episode is fantastic, with his standing up for Mr. Krabs and how he's the one to save himself from the Dutchman, although that was incidental. Probably. Unless I decide this is another appearance of Troll Bob. Both interpretations work. And last but not least of my 8.5 out of 10s is One Krab's Trash. Other than Ugh, which was purposely slow, I think this episode is the slowest out of the 8.5 out of 10 class, and unlike Ugh, that doesn't quite work to this episode's favor, which is why this one is in great but not amazing. But this episode still has lots of good jokes and good moments in general, like Mr. Krabs fighting his way through the graveyard. I also think this episode has quite a bit of absurdity going on between the valuable hat and the previous owner's name and the zombie skeletons, so that's all fun. And now, moving on down the tier, we've got Pranks-A-Lot, which came in with a score of 8.3 out of 10. This episode also should be pretty fresh on y'all's minds, at least if you're watching this close to when I published it and had seen my previous video, since it was the very last episode of season 3. I really like this episode, and I think the only reason I've put it in this tier rather than amazing is because even though I like this episode, there's just something about it I don't fully connect to. Like, the jokes are enjoyable, but I'm not going bananas over it. And so there's just a little bit of distance between me and my enjoyment of the episode, so it just kind of lacks that wow factor. And so now there are only 2 episodes left in the great tier for season 3, and both of these episodes came in with a score of 8 out of 10. It was a lot of back and forth deciding which one of these was going to rank above the other one, but I think I'm going to go with the far more unpopular choice of The Great Snail Race, as the second to last episode of the great tier. I know for some of y'all it was pretty surprising to hear that I liked this episode, given that my favorite character is in fact Gary the Snail, but here's the thing. I just don't find this episode as bad as it might seem. Yeah, SpongeBob overworking Gary like this isn't fun to watch, and those montages are the real downswings of the episode. However, the actual race where Gary does literally kinda explode is actually really enjoyable for me. Additionally, the humor in this episode is really good. Like, there's running gags and brick jokes all over the place, and it's great. But yeah, a lot of the Gary stuff is what dragged this episode down to the very end of this tier. And the last episode to be put in my great tier is Midlife Crustacean. I know putting The Great Snail Race above this one is certainly not winning me any favors, but I gotta be honest. Like that episode, Midlife Crustacean is generally a very good episode with good jokes and gags and a fun plot that gets dragged down by one general issue/moment. And for this episode, that moment is, of course, the panty raid. I talked about this quite a bit in my review of that episode, so just like any of these episodes, I'd recommend you just watch that review if you want to hear more, but basically I think the joke is weird and uncomfortable and it takes me right out of the episode. It also just feels out of character. So honestly, me putting it in the great tier is kind of being generous. Alright, and with the great tier now filled up, it's time for me to move on down to episodes in my good tier, which obviously, going by the name, I still like these episodes too. There are very few episodes of this show that I don't like, and if you're new here and you don't know that, well, you'll be realizing that very soon. Anyway, there's 7 episodes in this tier, however 2 of them will actually be in my bottom 5 of the season, so I just wanted to note that real quick. So I actually gave 3 episodes in this tier the same score of 7.8 out of 10 because, as y'all will soon be noticing even more, there are certain scores I give out a lot more than others. But anyway, the first of these 3 episodes is going to be Missing Identity. I really loved the vibes of this episode, and the first few minutes up through SpongeBob taking Squidward's advice to retrace his steps are excellent. However, it is once SpongeBob involves Patrick in his plan that the episode goes downhill, because SpongeBob's interactions with Patrick in this episode are rife with frustration, and that's something I really cannot stand. The ending of the episode is also really good as well, but unfortunately that middle segment just really dragged this one down. Trying to decide which episode would come after Missing Identity was hard because it was the choice between an excellent episode with an ending that pissed me off, or an episode that I was only passively enjoying the whole time, but that had never varied in quality. And in the spirit of positivity, i.e. trying not to have the whole experience ruined by the ending, I decided to go with the former, which was the bully. Yeah, so this episode is really freaking good. Flats as a character is so funny, and his conviction to kick SpongeBob's butt is a lot funnier than you'd expect it to be. There's all sorts of really good jokes in this episode, from the famous, like the old man, to the lesser known, like Flats driving over a banana peel, or when he interacts with his dad. However, the ending is just so not good. I won't say bad, but it just was really not pleasant for me, because I understand it's supposed to be ironic or whatever, but it wasn't funny to me, just frustrating, since Mrs. Puff as a character in this episode was frustrating. And yeah, that was the point, but just because frustration is the point doesn't make it a good decision. And so if the bully was the great episode with the poor ending, then the episode with the stable, less stellar quality is going to be Plankton's Army. Like I said before, I enjoyed this episode just fine, but in a more passive way, for lack of better terminology. I mentioned in my review of this episode that I felt there was something empty about it, and I stand by that. It's kind of that same distance from enjoyment that I expressed feeling with pranks a lot. However, this episode has it worse, and I feel like there's something within the episode that's causing it. I just don't know what. So, for whatever reason, it doesn't work super well for me, but it's still a good episode. Alright, so now I'll talk about the last 2 episodes of the good tier before we get to my bottom 5, and each of these episodes had unique scores, so no conflicts here. The first one of these is going to be As Seen on TV, which I gave a 7.5 out of 10. The first part of this episode was pretty good, with the production of the commercial and then the finished product that we see. However, what I don't like about this episode is the way SpongeBob acts. It's just not all that funny to me. Like, yes, there are funny moments here and there, like with Old Man Jenkins, or with Striped Sweater, or with Mr. Krabs in the office, but generally I don't like it all that much, and the ending makes the episode feel incomplete to me, even if I can understand what the episode was probably going for. And so now the last episode of my good tier before the bottom 5, so the third to last overall, is going to be Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 4. Like other episodes in this tier, this is an episode I struggled to really connect with. It was good, not much wrong with it in general, but the few really standout jokes could only get it so far. And I've got the unpopular opinion that I didn't find Wumbo to be all that funny. Also, I thought that the townspeople were kind of assholes, even if somewhat justified. I thought the scene with Squidward getting low-key brutalized was probably the highlight of this episode, along with the very beginning scene of SpongeBob being a deranged fan. But yeah, the episode just kind of lacks for me. But hey, it managed to escape being in the bottom 5, so good on this episode. And with that totally smooth transition that I totally didn't plan in advance, I'm now going to be talking about my bottom 5 episodes of Season 3. So these episodes span multiple tiers. 2 are in good tier, like I said earlier, and then the other 3 are in the okay and barely tolerable tier. So the mediocre tier actually gets skipped out on, Full disclosure, it wasn't always this way. If you check my review of this season on the SpongeBuddy Mania forum, which is, as always, linked in the description, you'll see that I had episodes in the mediocre tier before, but I changed the score of 2 of them, and I'll talk about that in my blurbs about each episode. So why don't I just get started then with my bottom 5, starting with number 5, New Student Starfish. Oops, up there. This episode had a score of 7.2 out of 10, hence it's in my good tier. So obviously this is an episode I still liked, even if it is in my bottom 5. I liked the general plot of this episode. I think the catalyst is pretty wholesome, and the first few minutes are good as well. However, like many episodes I end up not liking that much, this episode has a big problem when it comes to frustrating the shit out of me. This episode kind of combines some of the elements I didn't like from both Missing Identity and The Bully, which is a frustrating dynamic between SpongeBob and Patrick, and frustrating actions taken by Mrs. Puff. This episode has got some good jokes even during the parts where it annoys me though, which is why this episode remains good rather than okay, and the bizarre nature of the ending also helps keep things light. Next up is number 4, My Pretty Seahorse, which came in with a score of 7 out of 10. This is another episode where I felt really disconnected to everything going on. It's probably the episode that most gave me this feeling during this season. Overall, this episode is pleasant, but it doesn't have a lot of jokes that land for me, and I feel very passive when I watch it. Like, nothing is really making me engaged, but nothing is really disengaging me either. It's just on the TV. And that makes for a fine episode to have on when I'm maybe doing something else, but that doesn't make it an episode that I like very much. What saves this episode, just barely, from being in the okay tier is that the last couple minutes of it are pretty good. And moving out of the good tier into the okay tier, we've got number 3 of the bottom 5, Sponge Guard on Duty, which had a score of 6.5 out of 10. So now that we're in the okay tier, I can officially say that this is an episode that I don't really like. Now, I don't dislike it, which is why it gets to be in this tier, not mediocre or below. But basically, this episode feels really forced to me, and when I watch it, I just have so many questions about the plots and characters, and not the good kind, where I'm curious, but the kind that undermines my enjoyment. And beyond that, the episode is kind of boring and somewhat veers towards frustrating at times. Sure, there are good jokes, but nothing really keeps my enjoyment up at all, so it's simply an okay episode. And now, moving out of the okay tier, skipping over the mediocre tier, and landing at the barely tolerable tier, there's actually 2 episodes in this tier that will then round out my bottom 5 of season 3. And again, I changed the scores on both of these episodes for different reasons, and I'll give my brief reasoning in each blurb. So for my number 2 of the bottom 5, we've got Party Pooper Pants, which I gave a score of 4.3 out of 10. Alright, so to the surprise of no one, I disliked this episode. Like many other episodes I've got problems with, this one was frustrating. Additionally, I felt like the pacing of this episode was off, and it probably should have been a normal length episode with the way it stretched out some scenes for no reason. I also had problems with SpongeBob's character in this episode and how that was executed. This is also why I scored this episode down by a whole point, as it was originally in mediocre with a 5.3 out of 10. But I scored this one down because personally I felt like the way SpongeBob's character was handled in this episode had an air of ableism, particularly the anti-autistic kind, all over it. I doubt this was intentional, and I'm sure it was at least partly a product of the anti-autistic writing that was becoming more popular on TV at the time, but it was just the vibe that I got, and so I do not like the episode for that. Well, that and all the other shit, but that's why it's in Tolerable now. And now for the moment you've all been waiting for, even though it's obvious now, my number 1 of the bottom 5 of season 3, the episode I like least from this season, is The Sponge Who Could Fly, which came in with a score of 4.2 out of 10. This is another episode that should be pretty fresh to y'all, so I'll try to be brief. But basically, this episode is an annoying mess that frustrates me more than every other episode in this season, which kind of automatically puts it down in this tier. The animated portions alone would actually probably be in the tier below, although maybe not. But the patchy segments are actually the highlight of this episode, and they're quite good. I also like the lost episode aspect of this episode. It's just the plot and execution of that plot, of the animated parts, that really bring this episode down. Asshole behavior left and right compounded with confusing messages and poor pacing. Yeah, when this episode comes on the TV, I'm good. And with that, that's all of season 3 ranked. I dread to see how many minutes I've already talked, because this is only like the first half of the video. But hey, what can I say? This show gives me a lot to talk about. Anyway, let's move on to the next segment where I discuss the average episode rating of the season. I see no reason to drag this out, so let me just say that it should come as no surprise that this season had a pretty high average episode rating, an 8.4 out of 10. Now, note that I did not recalculate this rating with the changed ratings for Party Pooper Pants and The Sponge Who Could Fly, and I didn't because I feel like if I did, I should have been updating the score of every episode. Because right now, I bet this rating would be lower, but I'm happy with Season 3 having this high rating, the same as Season 1's. And remember, that doesn't mean that I like Season 1 and Season 3 the same, because I don't actually. And I suppose that's my cue to move into the next section, which is my general discussion of this season. So, let's talk about Season 3. I'm just going to come right out and say that this is my favorite season of the entire show. And I also think that Season 3 is the best season of the entire show. This is pretty much fitting in with the popular consensus that the second and third seasons are the best, and while I take issue with a lot of popular consensuses surrounding the show, this is one of the ones that I don't. Although I don't see many people articulate why they think Season 2 or Season 3 is the best, so that's what I'm going to be doing now. Let me start with talking about why Season 3 is my personal favorite. I mean, the first reason is the obvious one. This season has not one, not two, but 3 of my favorite episodes of all time. That right there automatically gets this season pretty high in my rankings. I'd say in general that I also enjoy the episodes in Season 3 more than Season 2, which is why I rank Season 3 above that one, although the seasons are very close in quality. And I think what gives Season 3 the edge over Season 2 is time and experience. To me, this season is the culmination of everything about this show just coming together and being established. The confidence of everyone behind the scenes of SpongeBob SquarePants feels palpable throughout this season, and it's earned because their product is really, really good. And so I think this makes Season 3's episodes generally better than Season 2's, because they're good and they know that. If Season 2 is where the show came into itself, where it matured, then Season 3 is where the show really felt comfortable. And in my review of Season 2, I said that if the show was a tree, Season 2 was the inner trunk, while Season 3 was the outer trunk, the bark. Every season of the show builds upon the last, in my opinion, and what I see from Season 3 is that it took that growing confidence for Season 2 and ran with it, helping to give the show even more recognition and staying power. To me, there are 2 large strengths of Season 3. The first is that it has the characters down pat, and this feeds into how I think another strength, but not one of the 2 I mentioned though, is the comedy. Like I talked about in my review of Crabborg, this show, but especially this season, did an excellent job at making the humor feel natural. It was born from the established character traits of the characters we know pretty well by this point. Because the show has garnered this familiarity by Season 3, this season was able to easily build off of our familiarity for its jokes. And I think this foundation of familiarity also led into major strength number 2, which is that this season was really adventurous. There's some weird episodes in Season 3, like I Had an Accident in Plankton's Army. Now, this weirdness is pretty tame compared to what we'll be seeing in the future, but by this point in the show, it's pretty out there. Also, you can see how Season 3 was made during a real height for the show considering it has 3 different specials. Enough said. Although I adore Season 3, I have to admit it does have some flaws. Most of these flaws are in the form of episode duds like The Sponge Who Could Fly or Party Pooper Pants, but in some ways you could chalk up those 2 to maybe the show getting used to doing specials. Anyway, the main flaw I see out of Season 3 has to do with certain characters not appearing enough, and some not being written well. I said that characters was a general strength of Season 3, and they are, but certain characters got left out of that. For one thing, again, there's still the general misogyny problem this show has, with its female characters appearing much, much less than the male characters despite also being main characters. And one character in particular, Mrs. Puff, was generally written kind of poorly this season in both New Student Starfish and The Bully. However, she also did have good appearances like in Doing Time, but that is something that I noticed. This is a very small flaw in the scheme of things, but one that I still think is important to note. Another thing I want to spend time talking about when it comes to Season 3 is what I've been calling the aura of Season 3 obscurity. This has affected just about every episode past Chocolate with Nuts, with a couple exceptions like the camping episode. One of my commenters made a very good point about this that I wanted to reiterate here, which is that the last 2/5 or so of Season 3 was likely being made at the same time the third movie was, because to me, all of these episodes feel weird. I don't know, it's not that they're bad, certainly not, but there's something about these episodes that makes them more forgettable. They all feel like episodes you watch during reruns on a Sunday afternoon, which is an apt description for a lot of middle-aged SpongeBob episodes. But we move on. I'd agree that it's probably the split production, if that is indeed the case. That is the culprit for the way these last episodes of the season feel. But another thing that is important about this vibe for these episodes is that they actually help Season 3 transition into Season 4, which will have some similar vibes. Am I making the bold claim that the end of Season 3 and at least the beginning of Season 4 are similar in quality? Perhaps. I wouldn't say that that's that bold of a claim, but I digress. And now, moving towards the end of this video, I want to take a more retrospective look on Season 3 by assigning it its name, and also saying something about this era of the show. So in case y'all need a refresher, I like assigning names to each season of the show that encapsulate what that season is to me, and what it represents for the show as a whole. It doesn't necessarily directly equate to quality, but it can. Season 1 was the foundational season, and Season 2 was the maturing season. And so for Season 3, I'm going to go ahead and call it the Gilded season. There's a few reasons why I've chosen this name. Firstly, Season 3 is of course my favorite season, so I have to represent that by giving it a name of gold. And secondly, as I've already said, I think Season 3 is the culmination of a lot of what the show had been building up for itself by this point. While I do like and love the following seasons of the show, I think Season 3 really was the only one where I got this vibe like the show had been working towards this. Every season after this point feels more like the show exploring itself to varying degrees. And lastly, I call Season 3 the Gilded season because it's seen by so many to be the best season of the show. It's held up on a very, very high pedestal, with Seasons 1 and 2 right alongside it. And I think that's a perfect transition to my last point here, which is that Season 3 closes out what I, along with many others, consider to be the classic era. So something I also do during my reviews, though I'm not sure if I ever actually did it during the written reviews, even as I wrote them in my notes, is name the eras of the show, because I think that the popular consensus on the show's eras is wrong. Pre-movie, post-movie, and post-second movie are decent markers, but I find them to be inaccurate. However, pre-movie, or in this case the classic era, is a pretty accurate one. The only accurate one in my opinion. But anyway, back to why I'm calling this the classic era. Well, I'd say it's pretty obvious. I might be modern and middle-aged SpongeBob's defense lawyer, but I can't deny that there's something different about the first 3 seasons compared to the rest. Although the rest of the show is quite diverse as well. And I don't think that the difference in the first 3 seasons is quite as stark as some might believe. I just think that these 3 seasons fit together quite well, although Season 1 is somewhat of an outlier. For better or for worse, Seasons 1, 2, and 3 are what come to mind when people think of SpongeBob SquarePants. They're classic, and they are iconic. And in my opinion, Season 3 is the most classic and iconic of them all. Although this entire video is just my closing thoughts on Season 3, I still have some closing thoughts on the closing thoughts. Listen, I could really be here all day if we were truly picking my brains on any and all thoughts even tangentially related to Season 3, but I'll limit myself to just a couple main closing ideas here. So I'll start with the shorter one first. So I know my opinion about Season 3 being my favorite is not an unpopular opinion at all. Most people choose Season 2 or Season 3 as their favorite. But listen, how many people do y'all know who choose Season 3 as their favorite are also Season 1 through 3 dick riders? I bet it's most of them. And that's where I differ from many of the people who talk about this era of the show. Since this video was focused on Season 3, I decided to mostly not get into all that and how tired I am of these dick riders and people engaging with any season past Season 3 in bad faith. But just wait until I begin Season 4. Y'all better enjoy the piece now, because once those start, you'll never be able to escape that commentary. Ever. Defending SpongeBob SquarePants past Season 3 is one of the very few fandom hills I will die on. Another one of those is that Goku is a good dad. Dragon Ball fans, if you're here, do not ever step to me with that Goku bad dad shit because it's just wrong. Anyway, let's get into the other closing thought I had. And this is also something I've been mentioning from time to time in my reviews, but I wanted to talk about the way that my scoring has changed in the year since I originally wrote these reviews. I'll be straight up. The scores in these first 3 seasons, but especially this one, if I rated these episodes today, they would for sure be higher. The amazing tier episodes would likely have higher decimal points, and many of the greats would likely be an amazing. Good tier episodes I'm actually pretty comfortable with though. In general, I stopped scoring so many episodes with the great tier marker, I think, which is both good and bad. I have to be honest and say that as my reviews went on, I started seeing some inflation in my scores. Not that I was lying or anything, but obviously you guys can tell I like seeing the good in every episode, and I feel very strongly about episodes. It kind of just makes sense that over time my positivity would lead to higher episode ratings. I'm only pointing this out so y'all know that I am very much aware of this trend and to, I guess, warn you all that from here on out, you're going to be seeing the upward trend. Though, in my opinion, it doesn't really get noticeable till around season 6. And to keep on rambling about things no one cares about in a way that probably makes no sense, let me take you all behind the scenes for just 1 second. So, my reviews have always been based on vibes, and it's hard to score episodes across seasons because a lot of times it's easier to look at episodes within one season and kind of start basing scores off of that. That's why it's the episodes, especially at the middles and ends of the seasons, that start showing a new scoring trend, because at first I have to base on how I was scoring the previous season, but of course that will always have a little bit of difference, so that's kind of why I started trending up. It's like a spiral. That, and I wanted to combat the negative associations for everything past the first 3 seasons. But anyway, like I said, it's hard to compare seasons simply based on their average episode score, which is why I don't compare like that. The score is only there to get a general feel of how much I liked the season, but it only says so much. That's what the rest of the review is for. And that's that on that. Thank you all so much for watching this very long video and for supporting my channel. I truly would not be making these videos without y'all, because even though I love talking SpongeBob, videos are still quite the undertaking. I can't wait to get started talking season 4 with y'all, because I think we'll start getting into some real debates, which is exciting. And with that said, I think now is about the time I close out this video. So as always, I'll see you all in the next review.